Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar will be on painting workflows in Clip Studio Paint. It'll be presented by Sarajean Chung, also known as TheOneWithBear. Before we begin the webinar, we do have some housekeeping items that I'd like to share with everyone. So first of all, the webinar will be approximately 1 hour long. All attendees will be muted. The Q&A session will be during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. Attendees can ask questions in the GoToWebinar question box right away. Due to time constraints, not all questions will be answered. The webinar will be recorded. The recording will be shared on social media and will be sent to all registrants and attendees, as well as it will be shared on YouTube, and I'll share the YouTube links for you while we're in the middle of the webinar. As well, the panelists are going to be myself, Fahim Niaz, Joanna Brower from Celsius, and Sarajean Chung, your presenter. For those of you who are new to Clip Studio Paint is your all-in-one solution for stunning, ready-to-publish illustrations, comics, manga, and animations. For more information, please check us out at clipstudio.net/en and then at graphicsly.com. And with that, today's webinar will be hosted and presented by Sarajean Chung, and we will share our screen with her and pass the reins of the webinar to her.
Okay, hello everybody. You can see my screen, and thank you so much for being here. It's really my huge honor to be able to present this, and I hope it will be informative and helpful to you. So today, what I'm going to be talking about is my creative workflow, as well as how I manipulate my brushes, how I go over all the settings, and how to make your brush to work the way that you want for the style that you're looking for. So a little bit about myself. I am a full-time art streamer. I make my living off of streaming on Twitch, doing commissions, and also doing conventions. So I sell prints. I do traditional art as well as digital art. For my digital art, I make it into prints. For traditional art, I just sell them as one-off. So I actually tackled in a lot of different mediums. I use acrylics, inks, I use pretty much everything that you can kind of think of, and I can show you a little bit of an example of my older work and how I kind of came about to the look that I have this day. So if you ever get on my Instagram, if you scroll to the bottom, you'll see that I have tackled a lot of different things in the past, everything from line art, more heavily on line art, or something that's a little bit more grayscale, just studying the values, movement, and something a little bit more edgier or has more definition, something a little bit more soft blended. I have tried a lot of things. And this is, before we start, this is something that I would like to encourage people to do, is that I see a lot of young artists trying to look for a style, but style is something that comes to you naturally on your journey to create art. So basically, what I did was just always experimenting. I wouldn't even say that right now I have settled for a particular look, but I've tried many, many, many different things in the past. So you can see examples of my traditional work as well as my digital work. So all the way up to now, I'm going to show you a few examples of the work that I do now and my creative process for it. But before we start, I'll talk a little bit about my PC and my setup. I am using a Ryzen 2700 and also a 1070 graphics card, 16 gig RAM, and I work with Cintiq 22HD on a stand-up desk. So my PC is average. I would say it's relatively powerful. But before, for a long time, I was actually using an i5. So my PC actually has been running Clip Studio Paint without a problem. And you can see that today. Okay. So with that all done, now we can start the fun things. So to start with some examples of my work, and I will show you my from the beginning to the end and talk a little bit about each piece. So as you can see, some of my paintings have very heavy texture and a lot of different colors. The reason for that is I'm heavily inspired by oil painting. I love traditional art. Always have a soft spot for it. And there's just something about, going to the gallery and looking at these giant, heavy oil paintings with such texture. And even though before I was experimenting with really soft blending in digital, because I feel like that was the look that, digital was supposed to have. But then I started getting these ideas of I want to get that look into my painting. That's where the heavy texture come in. So for example, with this painting right here, this is the finished version. But when I first start, will look like it will look like a complete mess. So I usually would experiment with a few different compositions, uh, kind of just get a feel of it. I do this in sometimes in grayscale, sometimes in just flat colors. It's really just about the moment, how I feel about the painting. And then I will go in, and once I have something sort of settled, so I kind of had the idea in the beginning to have Medusa reaching out. This is Medusa versus Perseus, by the way. Um, I had the idea of Medusa reaching out towards him, but then in the end, I kind of want her to be more held back with her snake attacking. So in this case, I would make the 3D models in Clip Studio Paint to kind of give me the depth that I want in a comparison between uh, the size of the characters, and I'll go from there and I sketch it out. So once I sketch, I'll do some flat colors, some really ugly light source with the color dodge or what have you, and some a little bit of multiply layer. So I would kind of give myself an idea of where my lighting is coming from. So in this case, originally I wanted her to sort of glow, and then because the mirror is a shield, so the mirror is reflecting the light back to her. And then I kind of experimented with some motion blur, which I didn't like, which I decided I didn't like in the end, uh, because I wanted a more edgier look. And then I would go in and put down a lot of different textures to kind of start pulling the colors around. And then put in more definition, putting a little bit more definition, put in the design. And in these areas, I would start adding colors that I feel like would contrast uh, my main palette. And I will go in and talk a little bit about that later on when we're doing some demos. So right now I'm just kind of showing examples of my workflow in my already existing work, but we will be doing a live demo today. So again, more edge. And in this case, you would notice that I have a color layer on the top, and I encourage everybody to have a layer like this on the very top. So what this does is basically it's a blank layer. It is a blank layer filled with either white or black. And then once you have this, you set this to color, or you can set it to hue. Doesn't really matter. You set it to color, and it will turn your painting into grayscale. So you can do a live check of your values. And this is important because when you zoom out, this gives you a really good idea of whether or not your forms are reading. Another things that I would do during my painting process is I would always have another window open. So to do that, you go into Window, Canvas, and then you just do New Window on the work file that you are doing. And this would give you like a separate window of the file that you're working on, which is live, so you can edit it live. Let me give you an example. Oops, let's turn that off and let's see. So you can see it's actually doing it live because you can just see it. It's basically a duplicate of your window. And what I can do is I can flip this. You can go into View and rotate, and flip horizontal. You can flip this at ease. I kind of set this to a hotkey for easy preview. I set it to Control F, and then you can just, you know, have it flip around just for the heck of it. But I generally would have that over there so that I can always be on my toes with how my paintings are going and if my forms are correct, etc. Okay, so then I went in to add more texture. Here, let me get rid of that for now. Added more texture, added more lighting, and then do some experimental compositional changes. Sometimes I do this really late into my painting stage just because I felt like once I had everything carved in, I didn't really like where it was going. So this is a really important thing. If you feel like something is wrong in your painting, don't be scared to change things up, even if that means it may take you another 2 hours to add to the painting. But if something is just really nagging you, maybe it could be because you need a big change in the composition. And I know that feeling of just dreading it, like not wanting to take that step because you feel like, oh my God, it's gonna take me so much longer to get to the finishing stage. And I feel like I just kind of want to pull through it and make it work. But there's something really refreshing of just accepting, okay, this needs changed, and then just change it. In most cases, when that happens to me, I'm so much happier with my painting than before, and I get like a second wind to kind of finish it off. So this happened right here because originally I had the snake head over here, the snake head over here, but I just wasn't really happy with it. I changed it to over here, but I still wasn't happy with it. So I just changed it around. In the end, I was much more happier with things not taking focus away from their engagement. I feel like it flew better. So that's how it came about in the end. So here, let me make that a little bit bigger. And then the final stage, I'll do a lot of touch up to kind of tone back on certain textures that I didn't like. For example, I felt like this entire area was too overwhelming. Like it just had too much texture going on, right? So I would, try to tone that back a little bit. Okay, so that's one of the examples, and I will show you more workflow before we jump into the demo. Okay. So same thing as here, I usually start with a very rough sketch, flat colors, and a textural brush. I created this brush for my own matting purposes because I really like the heavy textures. And then I went in and then just start painting right on top of it. I really like painting on the same layer just because I can pull the colors around a little bit easier for myself. It feels more intuitive to me. So, and then adjusting. See, this eye right here. So I adjusted the position of this particular eye because when I was flipping it, I felt like one of the eyes was too low. So that's a really good way of just kind of checking to see if your anatomy or your composition is working is by flipping it. And then we also did some experimental color dodging, which I didn't end up using. Okay, and then some other examples. So this is a painting that I just finished very recently, as in 2 days ago. So again, I would start with something very rough, try to figure out, if I like the composition, if I like the thumbnail. This is a tribute to one of my favorite game series. I don't know if anyone in the audience would recognize her, but this is Junko from Danganronpa, which is an amazing, amazing game. So again, I'll try to experiment with all the colors. I'll talk about how I use my colors later on, carve out more details, give it a more stronger lighting if I felt like this just wasn't working. Because originally I was just gonna, start detailing and not really care about the contrast between the background and the figure itself. but it just wasn't working for me. So I went in with a really big brush. Really big brush is your good friend. Okay, when you are struggling with a painting, use a really big brush to go over some areas that's bothering you. It might actually help you a lot. So this is what happened over here. I was like, okay, you know what? She just feels really flat. Um, so let me go in with a big brush, try to mark things. Okay, that's a little bit more interesting, like I could feel the contrast a little bit better in this stage, but the background and her are still somewhat blended together, and I didn't like that. So I went in and I changed the color of the background to give it a little bit more contrast. This particular caution tape was actually found in the decoration brush accidentally during one of the presentation that I was doing in LA. So that was a funny story, but no time for that today, unfortunately. So I had that idea of bringing the same color palette to the top so that they can kind of echo each other in terms of color scheme. And yeah, it turned out to be a lot better if you can compare the before and after. So this is another thing that I really want to emphasize is comparing your before and after. Record your process. The reason why I always have these stages is not because, I want to go back and then make some changes. It's more like because I want to record the process so that I can make sure I did not steer away from your original sketch for the worst. Because what I noticed about a lot of the artists is that they would always talk about how in the later on of their painting process, they realize that they're losing motion or losing the energy in their original sketch. And the reason for that is because when we are tightening things up, we are putting in more information, more stroke to define your shape or your forms. But because we get so technical about it, we want to get everything to look right rather than things having energy, so that the more you refine it, the more you start to just care about the technical point of view rather than the flow of the painting. That's something that happened to me a lot in the past. And how I overcame that was actually to keep my previous process. I always, just duplicate my folder when I reach a certain stage. So I can always compare, okay, so going from this stage to this stage, did I lose anything? So I stumble on my words there. Did I lose anything in this stage? Okay, if not, then I go into the next stage, carving things out, and I compare. Did I lose anything there? I flip it. Did I lose facial definition, or kind of put the body parts in the wrong place in comparison to before? Because if you're losing things gradually during your painting, then when you compare your final product to your initial stage, you might just feel like you lost a lot of things, but you don't know why and you don't know how. So I like to keep things in the bite size, basically. Um, okay, if I compare that, do I feel like it's for the best? Do I feel like that's for the best? And then, you know, just keep on doing that so that you can maintain the look that you were going for originally. Okay, so hopefully that helps with some of the problems that I get asked a lot. And let me see if we have time to share. Okay, so this is a really good example of me tackling a lot of different styles. This was something that I did quite a long time ago. I think in 2016. This was done for a body painter called Kate Pike Fashion. I don't know if any of you will recognize her name. She's a very, very amazing body painter. So they commissioned me to do a card for them. So I would start with, a sketch. This was done with the soft watercolor brush. Uh, Actually, this was done with smooth watercolor brush. Sorry, smooth watercolor brush. And I would just kind of have a little bit of texture, a lot of colors, and then carving out the facial details. This is another example of me comparing my flow. Do I like this better? Do I like that better? Just does this edge work right here? I didn't really like that. So I wanted to break apart from there. How do I paint the water? I study a lot of the water material from in real life photos, and I try to incorporate that into that. This painting was really made really easy um, by this smooth watercolor brush. I basically only use two brushes for the painting process. I use the smooth watercolor or I use the flat oil paint flat brush. So these two are both defaults that you can find. But today I'm actually going to be demoing some other brushes. But those two are absolutely my go-to. I use them all the time for everything. Okay, so here I want to actually touch up on one of the things that people may neglect. Sometimes when you put a lot of effects, like these textures, right? So these textures are set to glow dodge, but then you would notice like once you put them in a folder, it becomes like this. So if I pull these out, you'll see like it goes back to normal, like all the effects are applying to the painting, right? But if I put this into the folder, the effects aren't showing through. And sometimes people would get confused or think it's a bug. But what happens is actually in the folder, what you do is you go here, you select the folder, you go in here, and instead of normal, you choose through. This means every effect in that folder is going to come through. So all you have to do is change from normal to through. Okay, I think usually like people would get really confused, like how come this isn't working? I definitely had that in the past. But yeah, and then in the end, I did some color adjustment to make sure it's not too. Gave it a little bit more contrast. I like the blue, the cold blue, to kind of enhance her warmth. But yeah, those are some examples of my work, and I feel like we may only have time to show these few examples. So I'm gonna go into the actual demos. Let me see. Let me just make sure I did not forget anything before we move on. All right. Another thing before we jump into the demo is talk a little bit about my workspace. So you see I have my color wheels over here and then my tool palette over here. The reason for that is because I'm right-handed. All of these tools are customizable, or the panels are customizable. And once you're happy with that, you actually can go into Workspace and then register your workspace. So I have two types. I have one for stream. So I have one for stream where everything is snapped to the left so that I can optimize the space when I'm streaming. And then I have another one for when I'm usually working because I'm right-handed, so it's a lot easier for me to like adjust the colors and adjust my brush settings on the fly on the right. So, just know how you work, and if you feel like something is counterintuitive, change it up. Like, don't be afraid. There is no right way or wrong way of doing it. It's just finding a way that's suitable for you. All right, so now we can finally get into the exciting part. That is going to be the demo part. So today I'm going to be showing you uh, the watercolor. I'm going to show you two examples of what I can work with. So in February 2019, if you have not updated your version, please do update your version because every update that Clip Studio Paint does has been fantastic. They add in a lot of really amazing tools for artists. But one of the best things that I feel like they added recently was the realistic watercolor or the realistic paintbrushes. There are quite a few of them, like the gouache, the dry gouache, they're amazing. But today I'm going to show you the watercolor one. So this particular brush is very interesting. what it does is you can see it has incorporated textures into there. And when I am, laying the color on top of each other, you will see that it's multiplying, kind of, kind of imitating how watercolors work when you lay a wet, when you lay wet paint on top of dry, it will have that multiplying effect. Now, how you would go if you don't like that, what you can do, so this is the default brush setting that you can see in your tool property. What you can do is you can go in and change the mode because, and right now it's not multiplying because the opacity is, hold on, let's see. We can go into, let's see, replace alpha. This is a really interesting brush setting because what this does is essentially getting rid of your original opacity. So for example, I have this color right here, right? If you want to go in and have something that's a little lighter, you actually can go in and replace that alpha. And then this would become a little bit more transparent. Rather than painting a color on top of it, you can actually replace the alpha of this particular area that you're painting in. This is a really interesting property to have and that I haven't really seen other programs do it. The reason for that is it basically, without erasing, without having to erase a color that you don't like, you basically just replace it with opacity. Um, so there are a lot of different functions that you can change in here. You can change it to, let's just change it to multiply again, right? And then you can then change it to replace alpha. Let's change to another color and it'll blend a little bit better. So usually when I'm painting, I like to set my tip a little bit softer so I'm not constantly grinding on my tablet. Most of the people, they would start in the beginning, but I like to have the soft touch so that I have a little bit, I don't have to press down nearly as hard when I want to blend things out. Okay, so stuff like that, it's all very customizable. The next thing you can change is the texture. So here, let's see. So right now we have a paper texture. You can see like it has a little bit of that nice papery texture there. But if we want something rougher, let's see. I like the rough texture one. Okay. Let's try this color. Oh, there. So you can see that it actually becomes a different texture in the brush compared to before, right? Let me compare that. And you can easily just change this around. Let's see, drawing paper. Why not? Right? You will see that they have different properties and you can change it just as easily as, going in here and pick a different one. So always be experimental to find your own look, to find what your, I don't know, to me it's just so exciting to always be able to just go in, experiment with a few new looks and just have fun with it, because that's sometimes I think what we forget about art is that we're so focused on wanting to be good that we forget to have fun. And this is one thing that I always kind of encourage people to do is don't be afraid to fail. Never be afraid to fail because everything that you feel like you're failing is just going to be a lesson to you for later on. So right now we're using the multiply one. Um, so we can put in some stuff. And if I feel like that's too, I don't know, just doesn't look that great, like too many rough patches that I don't care about. I go into replace alpha and I go over it again to kind of smooth it out. So I just use basically one brush and I can get my hard edges and um, I can get my soft edges. This is what I really like about Clip Studio Paint is I just don't have to be switching tools around all the time, you know? Like I just use one tool, I change the setting and I'm happy with that. I can blend, I can experiment with just using this palette here. And then you can go in and change all of these. So border of watercolor, we can do like a thicker effect. So you can see this one gives like a interesting border of when you put in too much water or it bleeds onto the side, you know, like sometimes you'll get that drippy feel. Here, let's see. And then it just has that little edge there. Oh, here, let's see, we can do multiply. Let's do multiply over here. So I don't want that much edge. Again, everything is super customizable. All you have to do is go in and change a few things, and that will work however you want it to. Now, another thing is when you go into this color palette, so maybe one thing that a lot of people don't know is these brush properties. What happens is if you check off these little eyes, you actually can disable what shows up in the tool properties. So for example, if I'm using a painting brush, I don't need to be changing a few things all the time. Like for example, if I don't care to change the border of the watercolor, I actually can just turn that off. I don't have to see it, so it doesn't clutter up. But if I do want them to show up, then I just click on the eye tool. Like I don't need the process after drag, so I can turn that off. Just so it's not too overwhelming over here, so you have to constantly look for the thing that you want to change. Another thing is the brush tip. Now, I don't like the super round look, right? Because I feel like that's not super uh, traditional like because traditional we have the brushes, right? We have something that's a little bit more uneven. So what I can do is I can go in here. I can instead of a circle under the brush tip section, instead of a circle, I can go into material and I add a material. Let's see what we can find. Uh, let's try this one. Okay, so now it's going to change the tip from a circle to a material, like that's going to be the tip now. But I still want it to be, I don't know, kind of uneven because this still looks really even. So I can go in direction. So instead of it being a unified direction like this, when you drag it, like when you drag it right now, it's just one direction, right? I can go in here and then check random. So now it's going to give me that patchy look. What this does is it basically uh, randomizes this particular shape whenever it's gonna put it down. So how many times it's gonna put it down is dependent on stroke. You can have less stroke, you can have more strokes. So it'll basically stamp it less times when you're going over a stroke. So then you can give it quite a nice feel to it. And then we can go into replace alpha again and just blend it out. You know, this is really exciting for me. I actually just found this out not very long ago, but it's so fun to be able to try stuff like this, and I can increase the scale ratio of my of the paper, the rough texture, so that you can see right here it looks like that, right? And then we can see now the texture is a lot heavier because I increased I increased the scale ratio. Okay. That was when my Clip Studio Paint was saving the recovery info. It does that every 15 minutes, which is a good indication on time. So yeah, you can go in and experiment with this quite a bit, however you want it. And yeah, that's the watercolor brush. I really hope you guys can give this a try. I had a little mock-up from before, just from me playing with this around, because this is just really fun. And all of these functions, are actually available for every single brush. The older watercolor brushes, they work a little bit smoother because they didn't have the textures put in them. But you can actually fully customize them as well. Here, let's see. Let's go back to, oops. Let's go back to this. The older watercolor brush, if you put down the paint and then you release the pressure sensor, you release the pressure on your tip, it's actually going to blend right into each other. It's going to blur. So if you combine these two brushes, you can actually get really, really, really nice colors around the paintings. And the reason for this is because, hold on. This particular brush has something called color mixing enabled, and you will notice that when color mixing is enabled, you cannot do blending mode. So this brush that we were playing around with before, it has the blending mode enabled and the color mixing disabled. That's the major difference between the painting property. So the color mixing allows you to blend the color when you put less pressure into the brush. However, it will not let you blend using the blending mode. So that's when you can, start another brush, save the brush, and just go over it, create that look for you. So that's the watercolor part, and we have limited time, so I'm gonna jump into the oil paint brush because this is another one of my favorite. And this is how I usually work. So when I have, hold on, let's see. I don't know how many people have used this function, but this is such a great little little thing that you can use. It's called the close and fill. Close and fill is under the fill bucket tool. And you can have your line art on top. This is super fast to use flat colors. And then have your color layer on the bottom. And then you can set your line art to reference layer. So that's the little lighthouse button over here. Set it to reference layer, select your flat color, and then you can see here, we are going to target only white and transparent and make it multiple referencing, make it reference the reference layer. And then what it does is, sorry. It actually fills the area that you're closing around. It will close that area for you. Why this is so important is because you don't have to use the paint bucket. You don't have to basically paint underneath it. You just have to be careful of where you select. So if I want to just select this particular area, there you go. So I can be a little bit more selective. If I want to fill this particular area, then I can go in and fill that. So why this is so good for me when it comes to experimenting with colors is because I basically can throw down colors just really randomly as well. Sometimes I have a lot of intricate details in my work and I would just, experiment with a few different combination and do that really fast. Okay, sure, I kind of like that over there. Why not? Okay. And then I just circle around the areas and let them close up. Okay. So this is a really good way to do my flats. And also play around with different color palettes. If I don't like certain color, I change the mode to target all colors. And see, I don't like that color. And yeah, maybe, right? And then maybe not like the skin tone color. And I just go around until I kind of have a color palette that I really like. Now, I sometimes would have uh, a sub view. I can import a color reference if you guys so wish. I don't normally use a color reference, but if anybody is struggling with using colors or trying out different color palettes, I really recommend you guys to look up sites like this that can provide you with some ideas, because you cannot technically steal a color palette, right? So experiment. The ratio of the colors are really important, so you can always just kind of go in color pick. You can color pick from here and experiment with that. See if that color is going to work for you. Um, is that color going to work for me? Something like that. Okay, you know what? I like that. I like that a lot, actually. And the good thing about the sub view is even after you close the entire program, when you start it up, the references are still going to be in there. So you don't have to keep on constantly open multiple references whenever you start up Clip Studio Paint. So we're going to go get rid of that. And the next step that I would do is actually use a brush that I designed. I designed this dual color brush, and I would pick, oops. I designed this dual color brush. It's kind of like a bubblegum color. And I'll do the texture, kind of matte the texture down. And just pull the colors around a little bit. Okay. And well, I'll just kind of randomly put them in. And then the next step is I'm going to use a multiply layer. I'll change this to multiply, and then I'll use it's under here. It's under the figure tool. Lasso fill. Lasso fill is super amazing. Because it's so fast. So basically I'll go in and I lasso that part. So this gives me like a really good way of putting in shadow. What it does is instead of having to, control backspace or whatever to fill a color, it just automatically fills the color that is around that you just selected. So I can go in and do this entire part. For example, I want them to be in shadow. I want this part to be in even more shadow. Uh, this part right here, maybe these parts right here. And that just gives me such a quick preview of where my shadow is going to fall, right? Okay. All right. And then the next one, I'm going to change my line layer to overlay. Sometimes overlay, sometimes soft light. I just kind of play around with everything, or multiply, but let's try overlay, okay? So once I kind of like that, I sometimes will lock these layers and give them a little bit more transition. Oops. Let's use the oil paint flat brush. I would give them a little bit more transition. So I will lock the multiply layer and then just paint within the multiply layer. So this would give a little bit more variance to my shadow layer. Okay. And then maybe I will want to change my line art color as well. So instead of black, I'll go in and say, okay, this area, maybe I want them to be a little bit softer. So it's all just very flexible. There's no right way of doing a painting. I don't necessarily use the exact same process for every single one of my painting, but just experiment, see what works for you. Don't be too stubborn to change things up because you might learn new things when you're just trying a new process, right? And then in the end, I just start painting on top. So once I'm kind of happy with the way that colors are lying around, I just start, clicking these colors and dragging the colors around. So the oil paint flat brush is really, really, really great because um, basically it just blends with itself due to the color mixing property. When I'm releasing pressure, I basically just blend really, really easily. So I would be clicking on those colors and getting rid of some of those shadowy areas. So my purpose is to get rid of the line art. A lot of people have issues with moving from line art to painting. The reason for that is painting needs values to define your shapes and your forms rather than a symbol or rather than a line. So you have to have somewhat of an understanding of the form that you're going to be painting to be able to get rid of uh, those lines that define the edges for you. So if you are having trouble with moving away from line art, it's generally because you have to start focusing on the values rather than using a simplified method to represent what you're drawing. A really good way of studying value is just do photo studies. And also, like me, getting rid of the line art helps a lot. Just painting directly on the line art rather than underneath your line art so that you can see, okay, if this thing still kind of reads as I'm getting rid of those lines. Does this hair read? Yeah, I just kind of pull the colors around. Uh, so I will constantly be color picking these colors and dragging the colors around. Sometimes, oh, okay, I like that purple there, like, so I'll color pick that purple, drag that over here, color pick that purple, drag that over here, uh, and then have this blue echo over, I don't know, here. Because why not, right? You can't make a mistake. There's no harm in making a mistake. And you just start filling in, getting rid of those lines. And yeah, and due to time restraint, I cannot really fully demo the whole thing for you, but this is a little experiment that I did before that I can show you. So I would have my lines in the beginning and my close and fill as color flats on the bottom. I will add some textures in. I'll add the shadow and I would basically just start painting on top of it, carve out and do some overlay or color dodge in the end to kind of brighten the whole thing up. So this was what I was kind of working on before when I was playing things around. So you can see they have very, very, very different looks, but it's all in playing around with the brush settings, play around with the style. Don't stick to just one thing. Have fun with it. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. And we're a little behind on time. I'm so sorry, but I'll pass this on to Joanna so that we can do the question session.
Yes, no problem. Thank you very much so far. It was very
Thank you.
interesting and so many questions, so we'll see what we can
Okay.
do. So, first of all, when did you start studying art?
So I studied art I went to school for illustration and design way in the days, but the school was focused on design. So I stopped doing art for 8 years, but I've come back to art for about 4 years now.
Okay. So you showed a little bit how you customize your workspace. Can you just show that again, like how you move the palettes and how you snap them to the grid?
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
So, for example, you just basically drag this tab. If I want this over here, I just drag and drop, drag and drop. And then you can even combine the two. You can go in here and then drag it to the side. So now it's two tabs side by side. And then in the end, you just go, like once you're happy with it, you go into Workspace, you said register Workspace, you said test, and then it'll just register it for you. And now you have a new one.
okay, thank you very
Mhm.
much.
No problem.
Um, so you showed that you work on a lot of different layers. Do you prefer working on more layers or do you prefer working on fewer layers?
I actually personally prefer working on fewer layers. I would use multiple layers in the earlier stage to kind of test things around and play around with things so that I can experiment with things a little bit more. But my final stage, you can see like these ones are actually flattened because I prefer painting directly on top of it. So once I'm happy with experimenting, I know that okay, I'm going to be polishing this, the final stage I like painting on the same layer.
Okay. Um, so you talked a lot about adding textures and colors. How do you know when to stop adding textures?
So one of the things is the value check. When you have, okay, here, let's see. If I have this thing very small on the side, when you would know to stop adding texture would be when you feel like the small version doesn't read much anymore. So for example, here, let me show you. So earlier, right, I had a lot of things just kind of blended together in the background. And when I enable the value check, you can see like this part is really blobby and that part is really blobby. So, that's when I know I had to get rid of certain things. Um, or, when I got to this point, even, I felt like that particular part just is kind of a blur and it wasn't reading that well. So I actually went in uh, and blocked it out in the final stage. So you can see, always use a small preview, always make it kind of value check so that you can see your big shape. Like I thought that was kind of a blob there. So I went in and covered it up.
Okay.
Mhm.
Um, just taking a step back here, do you usually start out with a clear idea or is it more of a discovery process?
It depends on the piece. Sometimes I have a very clear vision of what I want to achieve. For this particular piece, I had a very clear vision. Like I never stepped away from it, but I changed the color palettes a lot. That being said, there are definitely some pieces that I've done before that just kind of completely took its own path. My traditional work is a lot more like that. So my traditional work, I don't normally do an undersketch. I just lay down the color, lay down ink, and whatever I see in the shape, I let it flow. So for me, I have this weird balance. My digital art is where I use to hone my craft to get better at understanding anatomy, and also structures. But my traditional art is more freedom, more creativity, and wanting to just accept mistakes and move on and turn it into something else. So for me, it really depends on the piece, whether or not I have a vision.
Okay.
Mhm.
Um, can you show again how you did the value check for your piece?
Yes. So here, let me start in the beginning. I will start a new raster layer right here. I will fill this uh, out backspace or whichever hotkey that you have, or you can just use the fill tool and then just fill the entire piece with either white or black. The black would help too. and then change from normal to color. And then that layer you just keep on top and enable, disable. That'll give you a live preview.
Okay,
Mhm.
wonderful. I think that's a thing that a lot of artists are interested in, how to check the values,
Yeah, for
especially since
sure.
you talked
It's
about how important it is.
Yeah, for sure. Because I use so many colors, right? Like the way that I use my colors are so chaotic in a way that sometimes it's dangerous to get lost in just wanting to throw in colors without the values being accurate. So instead of like something that's defined and interesting, I would end up with just a giant pile of blob. And it happens a lot in the beginning stage, where it just looks like a bunch of vomit. But don't be afraid of that. See,
So how long does it usually take for you to work on a whole and finish a whole piece?
um, to finish a whole piece, it depends on the piece. Like this particular piece took me about 20 hours or so, just because I had so many details in there, even though it's kind of like a portrait, but having to figure out where to put all of the characters in there, um, it took a really long time. Whereas something like this is a little bit more simplistic. It's just focusing on the movement, focusing on the textures. And then this took a very long time because it was such a huge piece for me. So this one took about maybe 40 hours or so.
Oh,
It really
wow.
depends on the complexity. Yeah, yeah. Oh man, it was a lot of tears and sweat.
You don't like have a lot of line art, but in the demo piece, you used line art for as a base.
Yes.
Do you have like a favorite brush for line art?
Yes, I do actually. I do line art, but I usually do my line art traditionally. That being
Mhm.
said, I really, really, really like the mapping pen. I kind of customized my own one. So this particular one, you can see my brush shape. I actually lower the, I actually kind of drag this to have a little bit of a bump when it comes to the the line art piece here. Let me quickly show you. I know we're running low on time,
Oh, no, no
but
worries.
yeah, but the reason for that is I like to have really thick lines and also really thin lines. And I would go into my Wacom property. When I'm doing my line art, I like to set the tip feel to a little bit firmer. This is so that I can have really, really intricate transition for thinner lines. And then if I really want to make thicker lines, then I press down really, really hard. So this is my brush setting. I just kind of pull the curve down a little bit more compared to usual. And also for the pencil line, I love the rough pencil. I don't change anything on there. I don't, for some reason, I just really like that rough pencil. Yeah, this one has a
Okay.
really great texture.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, just as a general hint, what's the usual file size you're using for your work, especially if you also want to make prints or just use it in different ways?
Okay, so basically the idea is decide how big you want to print first. If you want to print 17 by 11, 11 by 17, then you just go in here. Hold on. You just go in here, inch, change it to 11 to 17. Always have your resolution at 300 for paper prints. If you want to print on cloth, that will be something else. Cloth, I believe it will be 600 or 450, depending on the manufacturer. But if you have an idea of you want to turn this into a merchandise, always find out what your printer needs for the printing file. So for me personally, because I paint in a lot of squares, and my paper is 11.7, which is a really odd size. It's an A3 size. So I always paint. I have a custom one, which is A3. So I would always have this size set to 300 DPI. Okay, so this is the general size that I work with. But since I got an upgraded PC, I start to work on bigger scale. I would work on 20 by 20, 300 DPI.
Okay.
Hope that helps.
So one last question. It's a
Uh-huh.
big one. So
Mhm.
so you're a full-time artist, a full-time
Correct.
streamer.
Yes.
Do you have any tips for people who think they want to do that, and do you think it is a viable option as an artist? I mean,
Oh,
you're kind of
absolutely.
you're kind
Yeah.
of the proof of that, but
Thank you. Thank you. I will be completely honest. Even till this day, I still can't believe it. Um, I was just like any of you guys who are in the audience who wanted to make art as a living. I was a hobbyist too. Um, and I never would have imagined myself to be in a position where I can do art for a living. Now, first of all, this is a very realistic part, but I do think it's important. Finance is important. And the reason why I started doing art and be comfortable of just having this as a side income was because I had a saving to fall back to. I did a lot of different jobs throughout the years that I quit art. Basically, I did retails, I did waitressing, and I saved up a lot of money. Now this money allowed me to stay home and kind of just work on my craft and experiment and just have fun with my art for a while. So this isn't something that a lot of people do. They usually have a side job and then they have art on the side and then they just kind of do that together. But if you're to jump into doing art as a career without any backdrop, it's going to be a very, very, very tough path. And that is something that I just feel like it's important to kind of point out, even though it's not pretty, it's not dreamlike, but when you're chasing passion, you're also having to first focus on taking care of yourself. Now, that being said, um, what I do want to talk about, instead of like, other people will tell you, focus on social media, focus on growing your brand, focus on networking, focus on getting yourself out there, have a good portfolio. All of those are important, but people have already said that. One of the biggest things that fueled me as an artist and allowed me to become independent was actually bonding with people. And I know I actually have a lot of my audience, my own community in the audience today. And honestly, bonding with people, getting to know them on a personal level, and making them care about you and also caring about them rather than just as an artist versus a customer, right? That has helped me personally a ton on my art journey because bonding with my audience has made them just become so passionate about what I do too. They root for my success. They want to buy everything that I have made. And that's an incredible feeling. It didn't come from them just, like passing by an artist, and, oh, because this artist does good art. It becomes a friendship. It becomes trust. It becomes like we want her to do well. So this applies to if you stream on Twitch, if you go to conventions. Table at a conventions can be very costly in the beginning, so make sure you have a full body of work before you jump into conventions. Um, but doing conventions is a great way to earn money. But during that process, when you're doing conventions, don't just treat everyone that comes by as your customer or, people that will throw money at you. Make friends with them, get to know them, um, and make them care about your art too, and tell them story with your art. So I think that's one of the biggest thing that has helped me as an artist is just understanding people and having them in my life and learning from their story too, and then listening to all of these people's stories and incorporating them into my art. And hopefully others will feel something from looking at my art. So hopefully that helps. I know that's normally not something that a lot of people would talk about, but it's what made my living.
And I
Yeah.
think that's a wonderful place to end this. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for
You
this
guys so
really
much for,
nice
yeah,
explanation.
thank you.
Great insight.
All right. That was awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah Jean. And
Thank
thank you,
you.
Joanna, for all the questions. First of all, we wanted to thank you for your time, Sarah Jean. So thank you for taking an hour of your time and getting prepped for the webinar. So I'm sure everyone learned a lot.
I absolutely, that it was a huge honor. Thank you guys so much for taking your time to listen to me ramble.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for attending as well to all the audience members. For more information on Clip Studio and to learn more about Clip Studio, please check us out at clipstudio.net/en as well as at graphicsly.com. This video or this presentation will be recorded and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channels. So please make sure to subscribe to our channels. They're listed on the screen. Celsius Web is the official Clip Studio channel. Graphicsly is also our channel where you could see the videos and the presentations that have been recorded through the webinar. As well, please make sure to follow Sarah Jean and see what she's up to. Her handle is pretty simple. It's TheOneWithBear on Instagram, Twitch, ArtStation, Twitter. So please make sure to follow her there and give her your support. And I'm sure she'll probably be able to answer any questions you may have leading up to whatever you decide to do with Clip Studio or your art. So thank you so much,
Absolutely.
everyone.
Mhm.
Thank you, Sarah
Yeah,
Jean.
thank you.
Have a great day, guys, and talk to you guys soon and see you at the next webinar.
Bye, guys.
Bye.